Greetings, dear friends. We are sincerely happy to welcome you again. Today we will have a conversation with the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Hello.
Igor Mikhailovich, I would like to sincerely express our gratitude to you for your support on the spiritual path, for the knowledge and wisdom you share in our videos. It is very joyful to hear feedback from our viewers on how much the videos help them, how much everything unnecessary, everything alien falls off, how false mindsets from consciousness go away, and of course it becomes much easier to ascend to the peak. Today we would like to discuss one more topic with you, the problem of cyclical recurrence of sins. This topic is very relevant and sometimes quite acute for people who are on the spiritual path, because it seems like yesterday a person was aware of the cause of all his troubles. He sincerely wanted to get rid of some stereotypical pattern, of one of his weeds, but after a while the situation repeats itself, and a person's reactions in those situations are repeated. Thus a question certainly arises, why do those situations actually happen again and again, even though a person made a sincere decision and has a desire to give that up? Consciousness immediately says, perhaps your catharsis or your desire to renounce the sin wasn't sincere enough. Yet what happens in reality? Why do these situations and these scenarios return into a person's life?
As a matter of fact, everything is very simple. If we make a decision, it doesn't mean that we fulfill it. And that's where it all starts from. Again, often, each of us stereotypically has our own habitual sins, so to say, right? Some people enjoy recalling their past, others like to dream about the future. Still, others are irritable because of some trifles, and everyone has their own weaknesses, let's put it so. Or it is more correct to say that everyone has their own flower, which Satan holds on to. And it's enough for him to pull its petals so that we immediately react, you see? This is a pattern. By and large, almost everyone has both envy and hatred. I'm not even talking about selfishness, which is such a deeply living feature in us. Why? Because selfishness is our consciousness. It is what is being brought up from early childhood. In the fight for survival in this world, when we explore this world, we begin to understand one thing, that we have to fight for life, and that if we do not stand up for ourselves, we will lose. Therefore, it turns out that we don't want to lose. So we start fighting for life in our early childhood, just like any animal. Animals behave in exactly the same way. Note that if someone keeps a dog, for example, it's enough for two people to sit down together, and the dog will definitely sit between the two, right? Why? Because it attracts attention to itself. In the same way, little kids also attract attention and defend themselves. If we show weakness, for example, a child starts crying and we give him a candy, then we'll fail to persuade him not to cry until we give him a candy, right?
It is already sort of a learned situation.
Absolutely right. And all these manipulative technologies of ours, you cannot call them otherwise. They originate from the very childhood. The only question is, to what extent they have taken root in us, and whether they are ours. Who urges us to fight for survival in this world in exactly such a way? By defending and attracting attention to ourselves. And why do we need the attention of adults, for instance? While we are little, in order not to be forgotten, we must always be in the center, right? Just look, kids jump out all the time and always begin to attract attention to themselves. If they are mischievous and attract our attention, it is almost impossible to force a child not to be mischievous. If we don't pay attention to mischievousness, but notice how a child dances or recites poems, for example,
Yes.
he will dance or recite poems. Why? Just to attract attention to himself, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right. That's where egocentrism originates from. And a struggle for vril, a struggle for other people's attention, right?
Sort of stable neural connections.
Yes, but a child cannot know about that very vril or something else. So where does it all come from? The answer is simple. It comes from the one who forms egoists in us, from the demon inside. He needs attention, the attention of other people. So we fight for this attention throughout our lives. Look, there's a simple example. We are about to go out somewhere and we start choosing clothes or something else, taking into account how other people will react to us,
The public, yes?
what they will think about us, right? Well, in actual fact, will they notice us or not? What will I look like? Yet who actually said that anyone would look at you?
Everyone is concerned about themselves.
Absolutely right. If we look at what happens in reality, everyone is concerned about themselves and tries to somehow, some people even try to wear gray clothes so as not to stand out in the crowd, but they will definitely have something in order to stand out. That's how the world is arranged. We are constantly fighting, and we don't understand what we're doing. And based on everything we mentioned above, all our so-called stereotypical sins emerge, don't they? Envy. Whom do we envy? And what do we envy? Someone has something that attracts our attention. We begin to get a little bit annoyed. Why? Because other people's attention flows to another person, not to us. Right?
Yes, exactly.
And at the heart of everything is the power of Vril. Whom does it flow to? Us as personalities? What for? It flows to the demon.
When you have a boundless, everlasting source, right?
To consciousness, yes. It turns out that the demon skillfully manipulates us from the earliest age until our last breath. We often notice, let's look at older people. It seems like they should live, rejoice, watch TV, read books, and enjoy their lives. No, a retired person of a senior age begins to teach young people how to live. He starts sharing his experience and the like. This is noble and good if it's appropriate, but on the other hand, if a person lives by the concepts of 50 years ago, whereas life has changed, yet he continues to impose it all on children, youth, and so on. But why? Attention, Vril. He needs it. Some people will say that a person needs to somehow show himself.
To fulfill himself, yes.
To fulfill, yes. And here's a question. What does self-fulfillment mean? Is it for one's own benefit or just in the fight for Vril? This is true for both a little child and an old man. And just look how it is all interconnected, while everything else is based on that. In other words, the demon needs one thing from us, Vril, nothing else. And until you understand this, it is almost impossible to get rid of any sin. It's difficult. I'll put it this way. So it turns out that we make a decision that, yes, that's it. We won't sin. We won't envy.
That's right.
And we do not envy. We see that someone has something interesting and we say, that's it. I don't envy him. I don't have this envy, and so on. We said, I don't, 1,000 times. We convinced ourselves 1,000 times.
We provided arguments, yes.
Looked at it from all sides, provided arguments, and said, what is there to envy? For instance, someone has a new handbag. Okay. A woman is looking at another woman who has a new handbag. What is there to envy? I wouldn't buy it for myself, but it would match that blouse of mine so nicely. Well, I'm not envious, I'm just comparing. So these manipulations are so deeply embedded in us.
Yes.
That it is almost impossible to get rid of them, especially if we are controlled by a demon. He will do anything to ensure that we feed him. We are just a source of revenue for him. There's no other way to describe it. That's the whole point.
How to get rid of all these situations? Or there are even cases when your reactions may already be different, but the situations knock on your door anyway.
And they will keep knocking, and the situations will keep knocking. People, especially our friends who have embarked on the spiritual path, noticed, many of them noticed, wrote, and told us that they all stereotypically repeat the same actions again.
Yes.
For example, a person embarks on the spiritual path, and he feels that this world is not as simple as he was told. He feels that behind the visible, there is something invisible. He realizes that there must be some purpose to his existence in this world, and that he is here not merely as a part of the animal world, right? So the person starts searching. Somewhere he comes across some knowledge, religions, and he starts developing spiritually. He starts fighting and eradicating everything in himself that Satan imposes on him to the best of his ability. If he simply fights head on, directly, then basically, his whole life is a struggle and nothing changes. Everything repeats itself in a pattern. Why would it change? I'll simplify. Why would the system, that very demon, strain itself if simple elementary patterns work? After all, we fight them. We make an effort. We haven't given them up and haven't started living differently.
It's a strenuous struggle.
Absolutely right. Meanwhile, strain precisely means the power of vril. In other words, we pay a lot of attention to our object of hatred or struggle. Our attention is precisely the source of life. Let's put it this way, right?
Yes, that's right.
We spent our time, our life, on fighting against some thought imposed on us by Shaitan. In other words, we have transferred our own life to Shaitan. We devoted it to him. Well, it's a natural process, right?
Right.
Why would he devise anything new? However, what if we have become smarter? We really heard or learned. It doesn't matter. Or we ourselves gained this experience that we need to love God and simply not engage in a struggle, refuse to do what Shaitan offers us. And a person starts to act that way. What happens at the next stage? And this is where the most interesting thing starts happening. If we compare that with a neural network, it answers simple questions unambiguously and simply. But if we ask tricky, serious, and deep questions, then it begins to expand, to connect its resources, that is, to spend energy. So does Shaitan. If we gain more energy, whereas God's love is actually that power, either in its converted or pure form, which that very demon hunts for, right? Well, by pure form, I mean what we receive. After all, at the first stage, we both receive and give vril. And if we really strive for God, this is our goal, then eventually we begin to receive pure alat, that is God's love. Well, the demon doesn't hunt for it. Alat burns. But by investing our attention, again, in petty earthly things or in some patterns, we can convert alat into that very vril. You see how simple everything is, because personality possesses this ability. So, as soon as a person firmly embarks on the spiritual path and understands all his stereotypical weaknesses, these weeds in the garden, he begins to pluck them out. In other words, he goes along the straight path, doesn't give in to temptations, remains steadfast, lives in love and joy, and then the next stage begins. As if by magic, everyone around him becomes somehow angry and strange, not necessarily. Some begin to be accused of being fanatically religious or joining a sect or something else. People try to save them. Others start having problems at work, relatives and loved ones become ill, and a lot of chaos surrounds them overall. Who hasn't noticed this? Only one who didn't walk this path. Why does the system or the demon, so to say, create such a problem around a person? If he already got used to disregarding the imposed thoughts and desires from the demon in himself, then the demon begins to create problems around him. And if the person is distracted, this becomes a pattern. You see? That is, again, it will occur with recurring frequency. Let's say, if he became distracted by an illness of a close relative,
They will keep falling ill.
his close relatives will never get well. If he's distracted by problems at work, it doesn't matter in what area a problem arose, and the person began to emote and worry. These problems will never be resolved until the last day. Although, if we became distracted, if we stumbled, fell, and did not get up, the system will actually switch to more energy-efficient methods of manipulating us. I mean, it will return us back into kind of simple patterns since we worry anyway. Then we'll start reacting to everything simple. And when we begin to react to everything simple, it will abate the external events. You see how simple everything is.
So, as you move to the top of the mountain, let's say, the flora and fauna change.
They change.
Weeds change.
They do.
And manipulations become subtler.
And the demon becomes more cunning, smarter, and his chess games become more subtle in order not to let us pass. After all, what is a demon? It's a guard, and his task is simply to prevent us from reaching the top of the mountain. That's why he stands like a rock. That's why he devises different routes and makes the road difficult for us. While in fact, the road is simple, smooth, and wide. And if we do not notice these illusions imposed on us by the demon, we can easily pass without any stress, so to say. But if we start paying attention to all these problems, well, some people will say, how's that? Relatives fall ill while I won't pay attention. No, my friend, you will pay attention. You will help in every possible way. The point is, if this draws you away from God's love. Why? Because it becomes much more important to you than life, than God's love. It means the demon wins, and then you will start having problems. That's the point.
Powerful words. Thank you so much.
Realities. The realities a person encounters along the path. When he is aware, he is already forearmed, you see? And this knowledge is like during catharsis. When you hear from another person what a demon was doing to him, and if it starts happening to you, you perfectly understand what the demon wants. You don't know this game, it is new to you, but you understand what the demon wants, and you know how to act based on other people's experience. This is how catharsis was actually used, as an exchange of experiences, which is very important. It saved energy, saved time, and allowed people to become steadier on the spiritual path, to become stronger, and to defeat the demon more easily.
Igor Mikhailovich, there is another question. These very temptations from the system, are they secret desires of a person? Are they something he once acquired through the power of his attention and does not remember? Or is it not necessarily so?
Sometimes it can be that way too. We often dream about something, we wish for it, we invest our attention in it, but later on we just forget about it. However, we paid for it. Maybe we didn't pay enough for a quick delivery, but we paid for a later one.
Prepayment.
Yes, we made a prepayment, so it will be delivered to us later. And we already get a kind of temptation as a gift.
And we don't even remember that, right?
Yes, and we do not even remember that we ordered it. In the same way, the system itself begins to foist. Why? Because the devil has many tools. He has not only pain and suffering, but excuse me, he also has distractions based on joy, on wealth, on happiness. I mean, so-called happiness. When it seems to people that they live happily. How is that? In our understanding, it implies a good family, good wealth, that everyone is healthy, everyone is happy, they run around, they smile, and everything is fine. People are sort of happy by earthly standards. Maybe they are, but the question is, for how long? And do you see what is really going on inside those people? That's where the answer is hidden. You see?
A person sees how often consciousness interferes during the day.
Of course.
And of course, if a person does not have knowledge, this state of happiness cannot be permanent.
What is happiness in general? Happiness is God's love.
Right.
When there is God's love, then there is happiness. If there is no God's love, that's not happiness. Everything is very simple. Therefore, it's impossible to replace God's love with anything. Whatever good you get in this world, and whoever you become, without God's love, it's all temporary. And it's all dull. As an additional bonus, and if it's not from Satan, then it is good. Nobody prevents you from having a good family and living happily in God's love, right?
Right.
And at the same time, not hindering anyone. It is possible. But the demon wants to get his share. He's a demon, and he should dominate. That's his mindset. If he doesn't succeed in dominating, what does he become? An ordinary, I would say, servant of a human. And, excuse me, for someone who thinks he's a king, it's offensive to serve someone. Therefore, every moment, he'll be waiting to trip you up so that you, my friend, would fall and hit harder. Then he will say to you, so, have angels actually picked you up? You see, they haven't while I am near. That's how people sometimes forget to get up when they fall, because a sweet voice whispers to them, a good assistant who promises to solve all their problems. Sometimes he solves all their life problems, all of them. but doesn't give life. Yet everything passes, and passes in an instant. Even the longest human life is just a moment. So it's worth thinking for what sake and why you live, and where you spend the power of your attention, right?
Igor Mikhailovich, you always inspire, even when a person stumbles, to get up and still go to this peak. And indeed, at all times, those who traversed this path said that after a fall, this wakefulness, this state of wakefulness is very important so that the one whom you've dethroned would not rise again.
The point is that on the spiritual path, we fall quite often. And I would say it's like in boxing. You know, if you didn't fall many times in the ring during training, then you have a great chance of falling during competitions. Whereas if you fell a lot during training, then you have a much better chance to remain standing at a fight during competition. The same is in this case. We fall, but what do we fall for in order to get up, right? That's the point. As for traversing the path without falling, I don't know. It is probably difficult for a human being. Although, there are people who are lucky. I'll put it this way, who feel this love from birth and are drawn to it. Such bright souls who really cling to it, and nothing and no one exists for them. These are the lucky ones. But on the other hand, you know, the more a person falls and immediately gets up, the more he begins to value God's love. Why? Because he understands and knows when he is away from this love, how hard and painful that becomes. It's bad when people forget it. And in this case, there is also a serious and tough trick that distracts a person and covers him like a blanket so much that a person sees neither white light nor anything. There's nothing to breathe. There is no light. His life is in a nightmare, and he cannot escape. This is a difficult time, and many people often fall into it all. Well, in fact, it is merely a blanket that you can easily throw off and get on your feet, but it surrounds you with an illusion. In such a case, it's important not to lose the meaning and not to succumb to these illusions. Everything in this world is transient, and earthly life, too. It doesn't matter whether it's a serious illness or something else. What's the difference? If you are in a difficult situation, you need to open up to God's love even more. If your life is hanging by a thread, then there should be no doubt at all. You should be 100% in God's love, because this is a chance to take a step into the open door. But when we start to be afraid, to be scared, it's natural. Consciousness is supposed to be afraid and scared. We're not talking about consciousness. We're talking about personality. As personalities, we should hold on to God. But if we succumb to consciousness and get carried away by it, then what's the point of this life? Why did you live? What have you spent your power and time on? In general, what is the purpose of human existence itself? Is it to come out of dust and return to dust? To fuss here and disappear? To become a subpersonality? And then to recall everything and suffer for the chances you missed? Is it the meaning? Is the meaning of human life in suffering and agony? No, friends. The meaning of human life is in love and joy. It is really in that true happiness in which a human should be forever. And it all begins with the simple decision to take a step. So the first step is very important. And it starts with love for each other. So my friends, let's simply love each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igor Mikhailovich.
Thank you, my friends. Peace be with you.